Welcome students to another lecture in the series. Let's continue with the second head, income from house property. See, for the purpose of like in last lecture we studied about like how to compute the NAV. We did the basics. Let us continue further. So for the purpose of computation of your net annual value, properties can be classified into three categories, and the properties are, in that case, properties which are let out, then properties which are occupied by the owner for residential purpose, or properties not self-occupied owing to some employment at some other place, and the third case is the partly let out and partly self-occupied. So first thing is there in the section 23 subsection 1, where properties let out, the whole of the property is being let out. So we see the following things in that case. Let us see. The property is let out for the whole year, the whole of the previous year, or it is quite possible that for some part of the year it might get remain vacant, but for rest of the year it is occupied. So quite possible that it is just occupied for a part of the previous year. Then further, the case 1, we will see that in detail when it is let out for the whole year. In that case, the gross annual value will be the higher of these two, either the expected rent or the actual rent received or receivable. The expected rent is the higher of the municipal value or fair rental value, but subject to your standard rent, because expected rent cannot go higher than standard rent, which is fixed under the Rent Control Act. Then further, we can understand this here. The gross annual value in this case will be the higher of these two, either the expected rent or the actual rent which is received, and expected rent in this case cannot exceed the standard rent. So there are two values further beyond this: fair rent or municipal value. Whichever is higher would be the expected rent, but it cannot go beyond standard rent. That we need to keep in mind. Then further, let us have a look to this question. Mr. A is the owner of three houses which are all let out and not governed by the Rent Control Act. So we need to find the GAV in each of these cases. For the first case, we can see that we are given with municipal value, fair rent and actual rent. So we will be comparing the values and we will be finding it out. See, for the first house, we need to see the expected rent, which would be the higher of the municipal value or fair rent. Let us have a look there out first. See, municipal value, fair rent or municipal value, whichever is like higher, would be considered there out. So for house 1, they have considered here, after comparing 15,000 and 18,000, they have considered as 18,000. Here in this case 48,000 would be considered, the fair rent would be considered, and in this case 35,000, the municipal value would be considered. So that's what we can see here. These are the three values which are considered. And then further, GAV, higher of expected or actual rent, in that case further that we need to see. So there also we can make the comparisons, 18 or 16,000, so 18,000 only. 48 or 56, obviously 56,000 would be considered, and in this case the fair rent of 32,000 would be considered. So we can see we have these values here only here. Then further, Mr. A is the owner of the following four houses and all are let out and covered under Rent Control Act. Now see that it is covered under Rent Control Act, means the rent cannot go beyond standard rent. So from this information we need to find out the NAV in let out and covered under rent each case. Under rent each case. Let us see one by one. Here also we will follow the same thing. All the houses are covered under Rent Control Act, so thus the expected rent will be the higher of municipal value or fair rent. So we will see in that case, but it should not go beyond standard rate. So let us see it from here, from the question: municipal value of fair rent. So 52 or 56, obviously 56 would be considered, but it cannot go beyond standard rate, so it is within the limit. Then further, in this case, municipal value of fair rent, so it is 70,000 municipal value, and standard rent is 72,000. So again it is 70,000 that we can consider because it is within the limits. Then for here, municipal value of fair rent, we can see that it is 36,000 that would be considered from here, but it cannot go beyond this 30,000 because the house is being controlled by the Rent Control Act, so it cannot go beyond 30,000. In this case also 15,000 or 18,000, so 18,000 would be considered, and it is within the limits because standard rent is 20,000, so that can be easily considered. So we are able to find these expected value of expected rent for all the cases. and we can keep the actual rent here, and we can compare these two and find out whichever is higher would become the GAV. So we can just compare these amounts, whichever is higher we are able to obtain the GAV. Then we can subtract the municipal taxes which are given to us in the question, and we can obtain the NAV. Very simple. Then further is the case 2, that is let out and vacant property both, where means when the property is let out only for a part of the previous year, and for the rest of the time it has remained vacant for the rest of the year, and the annual value declines because due to that vacancy, then such decline in value shall be considered. So we need to find the gross annual value of these following house properties. Let us see. The expected rent is 85,000, rent per month is 8,000, but let out period is only 9 months, so it was vacant for 3 months. So solution, expected rent would remain as 85,000, annual rent would be 96,000, because 12 into 8,000. Okay, but there is loss due to vacancy, means for 3 months it was left vacant. So 3 into 8,000, 24,000, because for 3 months it was left vacant and the monthly rent is 8,000. So 24,000, there is a loss. So actual rent would be, after subtracting 24,000 from 96,000, 72,000. In this case, we can see that expected rent and the actual rent, whichever is there, we can consider this. But we till now we were considering expected rent or actual rent, whichever is higher. But in this case, we cannot consider the expected rent because it is higher, because there is a loss due to vacancy. And in this case, we can see that 85,000 or 96,000, annual rent of 96,000 is only more. Okay, so annual rent is more than the expected rent, but due to vacancy of 3 months, the actual rent has fallen below the expected rent. So in that case, GV, that is your gross annual value, GAV would be taken as the actual rent only according to section 23 subsection 1 that we have just studied. Then further we will be continuing in the next lecture. Till then, study well, take care.